Okay, so what I was going to do now is sort of show you some different ways of patching this thing. Because one of the things, again, it's sort of, you think, well, it's like a graphic EQ. What can you actually do with a graphic EQ that's interesting? And so I've been trying to look at different ways you can use it in a modular setup. This is the first time I've done this kind of sitting, talking to people while patching thing. So do interrupt me at any point, because I want you to be able to understand what I'm doing and not just to be me sitting in the front going, oh, look, I've patched something in. So let's just start with the simplest thing that you've all actually been doing already, which is using an EQ as an EQ. So this is the, so we get let's find a nice simple sample. So the first things you can do is just adding a little bit of air at the top. So it's that, you know, clearing out a bit of mud, getting a bit of clearer. You get sort of sibilance out of the vocals there. Find a good, so it's simple EQ boost. The other kind of classic thing is that sort of what you used to call smile curves. This is proper 80s hi-fi kind of effect. You do that. And suddenly you want everything to sound like that, and you keep that massive EQ, boosting the bass, boosting the treble. Another sort of classic simple EQ thing is that kind of radio effect. So if you've got a sound that you just want to cut through a mix in that way, you can do that. But then, so that's using it with sort of whole range audio. What's quite interesting is when you use it with a raw oscillator. So if we put in just a square wave, you can just manipulate the sort of vibe of that, you know, what that sounds like, the shape of those oscillators. So you can have a skinny, bright one, or you can have a, you know, massive, add a bit of bass on the bottom. And what I found interesting when you're experimenting with this is this actually works when it's patched as you would normally use it through filters. So if we take this through into a filter, if I can patch it correctly. I once did a talk where I actually built an oscillator on breadboard while talking, which I wouldn't recommend, but just about worked. So we've got that. And actually just changing the waveform going into the filter does kind of work, does get you that effect. If we so even there, you can really kind of change the voice of the oscillator, and that's just on a square wave in there. So it's quite an interesting thing, but just putting that at the very beginning, just taking one oscillator and then changing the flavor of it. And if we actually do see if we can get some other notes coming out. So again, you're getting weird responses to that because you've changed the waveform as it's going in. You do start to get a very different, you know, sort of jumping out at particular points. So that's the basic using it as an EQ, which is obviously a reasonable thing to do with it. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was phase, and we're going to try and demonstrate this on the oscillator, but I think it's not quite working as we hoped. So if you imagine your sine wave is going like this, a simple sine wave like that. If you take that sine wave and invert it, it goes the opposite way. Now, if you just listen to that normally, it won't sound any different. A sine wave that's this way up, a sine wave this way up doesn't make any difference at all. But if you mix those two signals together, they cancel each other out. So I'll just demonstrate that. There is a point to this. And this module inverts the signal. So it changes the phase through 180 degrees. So if we take a signal into a mixer here, and then take the mixer out, have another one, and we then patch the EQ'd version into that same mixer. And does everyone know what will happen when I plug this in? So it disappears. You can hear a bit of bleed because the center points on the faders aren't exactly perfect. What do you think will happen if I start moving the frequencies?
Start getting that frequency.
So it's exactly that. It's like a kill switch. So that is just that band. So it's a much stronger kind of effect than just it by itself. So literally just separating out of ways like that.
So Kanye said on his goals, Kanye, I miss the old Kanye.
So that's just quite a useful tool in itself for just separating out what you've got from doing that. The other thing you can do then with that same principle is if you, instead of plugging into a mixer, you take a signal in, then this module here is a, oh, my hand on the video, is a stereo output module. So it's a, so if we take the output to here, so that's flat. So if we then, just patch this wrong. It's much harder than you think to talk and patch at the same time. So that's the clean input on one channel. If we patch the filters onto the other channel, you're now getting actually the out-of-phase speakers. So it's like when you can open. If you start moving the faders, you're actually, I don't know if you can hear this. I can't hear it. I'm sitting right next to this speaker, but you're getting the signal split into different channels. It's like a weird fake stereo kind of effect you're getting from it. And you'd get probably more if you were to do, if you put a bit of reverb on there as well, you'll get that just much more.
So is that, how is that it's two signals?
So what is
one signal and one half of the signal is out of phase with the other?
Yeah, so that you've got so essentially those signals, when it's like that, the two signals are out of phase with each other. You can hear it because of the distance is different, and it's, you know, it's not a perfect system the way they're not perfectly mixed together. Like if you were to walk up and down, you would hear the sound changing quite a lot between the two speakers. But then you're now sending different frequencies to different sides, or to, so that the phase is changing between the two sides. I've obviously not explained it well, but it does sound like it does add something to it. Well, we try it with, somewhere there's a, I mean, that might do it. Yeah. So then the other thing I always tend to use things for is for putting in feedback loops. So if we take a signal into this, so this is the spring reverb. So we should get and this is not a real spring, it's the analog brick, so which is why it's not proper spring reverb. Just find a and then there we go. So this also has a feedback circuit on it, but if we patch the feedback through the EQ, let's try this. So that's obviously the high frequencies going in. You see you're able to steer where the feedback's coming from. And to some extent, you can do the same thing with like a bandpass filter, but with this, you can kind of have two different bands at once kind of being boosted through it. Oh. So there are other kind of feedback paths you can use. So we've got a pendulum here, which also has a feedback. You can patch feedback into it. So let's try that. So let's see what we get from here. It takes a while to get something interesting out of a pendulum, obviously. Maybe just a little bit of sneaky reverb on there to make it sound slightly less horrible. Slightly. Okay, so then we start patching feedback into it. So what you can do, take the outputs into the EQ here, and then back into the external inputs. You start to really get just like you need your pendulum to be weirder, but it does make it. So again, you're really able to change the whole. Yeah, so you could. Well, it's almost like fine tuning. Yeah. And again, you see you've got the interface there. You can just make really, really big changes very quickly, the way you probably couldn't with a more precise EQ. If you were trying to get a parametric EQ or something, or if you're trying to voltage control it, it would be a lot more difficult. So then the final one, I thought I made a long list of things to show you, but that's where we got through. You can also make it feedback by itself. So what I'm going to do here is just patch this into a maths. So in a maths, you've got two channels here that are attenuverters, so they can amplify it or they can invert it. So if we take, I've got to remember how the patch works. I'll make it so it's clear. If we take the output of the EQ into one of those attenuverter channels, and we turn these two off because we don't want anything out of them, then we take the sum, so it's like a mixer output between those two channels, put that into the input. Then we listen to the output. Then we invert it, whack up a channel. And keep the volume down. So that is that channel feeding back on itself. So it's amplifying it. And if you knock everything else back down, that should actually be reasonably close to 1 kilohertz and 410 and whatever it is. I actually tried it, when I tried it with the initial prototype, it was really pretty accurate. I tried it with this, it seemed to be less accurate, which I think maybe is my setup and how you amplify that stuff. But each channel you can get a, there's one there I think. Each channel you can actually get to feedback by itself. And there might be one there, you might need more gain for that one. And then there is a 16 kilohertz one, but I don't think anyone here can hear 16 kilohertz. So then you can say, well, what if we have that feedback loop, but also we inject another signal into it? So it's almost like, yeah, so we put the other mass channel in here. And let's see if this works. And this is what we were doing earlier when you came in, so. So you just get these really fucking mad. This one for the more peaceful, one for the Ibiza sunrise session, maybe this one. Yeah. I mean, it does just, as you can imagine, it goes off very quickly.
Said on his gun, the beast.
So we're some way from Ferris Bueller and his And for that is literally just a signal and a math. So there's very little in that patch. So there you are. Are there any questions? Anything I'm happy to go through anything again, or?
It's worth saying as well that this
video of this will be online, so you know you can look at this again with your module and check it out, and you know try those patches in your own time as well.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very
Enjoyed that.
Yes.
Still for us to find some more ways to use it.
That's it, exactly. I mean, I think it's nice because it's one of those things where the obvious use for it is not that exciting. So if you just say, "Well, do the obvious thing with it," you're a bit like, kind of,
Yeah.
but actually there is a lot you can do. I mean, there are other things I was experimenting with that are kind of too fiddly really to patch. I was quite interesting in when you've got an FM, a patch with two oscillators FMing each other, and then you start EQing the FM as it goes in. You can almost be having something where you have loads of FM at high frequencies and none at lower frequencies, or it's bumpy as it goes up and down.
Yeah.
Quite nice.
No, obviously, and using the feedback and everything gives you some really nice effects. I mean, just filling up the room, filling up the sound.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is what everybody struggles, I think, with Modular is just having a full sound rather than just
Yeah.
noise.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.